All right, welcome to Leaders in the Making. We are really excited today to be joined with some of my friends, and we're going to be talking about conflict and feedback. Truthfully, I think that this is a very important part when it comes to leading people and having a healthy community. And I feel like it is oftentimes overlooked as well. And so I'm really excited to dive into conflict and feedback and how we can be better about this as leaders. So like I said, I'm joined with some of my really good friends. We have Marla Tolbert and Emily Palladino. So Marla and Emily, welcome. So excited to have you on the podcast. How about you tell us a little bit about yourselves, your story, your WinShape connection, all that fun stuff.
Absolutely. Well, I just want to say that I'm really excited to be here. And I served in the camp world within girls camp for almost a decade.
Wow.
For 9 summers within girls camp at Mount Berry, Cadiz Springs, was on international project twice, Brazil and Costa Rica.
Come on, shout out
so
international
camps
project.
has a very special place in my heart. And now I get to serve all of WinShape on the foundation level within our talent services team as the manager of diversity, equity, and belonging.
Wow, that's awesome. Marla, what exactly is like talent services? What does that mean in the WinShape kind of lingo?
Yeah, in the WinShape world, so talent services is a fancy word for HR. So, nice. But I'm not just a paper pusher. I love to have some good fun. Yeah. And specifically, I get to care for people in terms of their experience, whether they are seeking employment at WinShape, whether they're here or they're transitioning out. So the full life cycle of someone who wants to experience serving and working at WinShape, I get to care for them well. And through DEB, that means really seeing, serving, and loving others while they're here as well.
Wow, that's awesome. Marla, I can't think of a better person fitted like for that role. So thank you so much for joining us today. Emily, you're here as well?
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about what you're doing within WinShape.
Absolutely. Well, hey everyone. I'm so excited to be on the podcast. My WinShape journey actually started in second grade. So I got to be a WinShape Camps for Communities camper for a couple years, repping the Safari Village. But fast forward to now, I've gotten to serve 4 summers as a summer staff and this past summer as a director associate. And so that has kind of led me here to get to work on the communities team as a director associate, like I said, specifically getting to work with our hosts. And so that's been an absolute joy getting to work with our church partners throughout the nation. Like Marla, I've also gotten to do international project. I'm going to Costa Rica again this upcoming spring, and I can't wait. And yeah, I think that's just about all my WinShape journey, all the camp stuff. So.
Wow, I didn't realize you were a camper. That's awesome.
Yes, I was.
Yeah, it's a full circle moment. Did you volunteer at all when you were?
I didn't.
Okay.
WinShape came to my community just a couple years, and I went every year. And then when I realized that WinShape was an opportunity I can do in college, I immediately joined because I remembered how fun it was. So.
And as a director associate, you're leading a team on the road, right?
Yeah.
Like you're leading a team of 25, 26 people.
Yep.
Man, and you did that last summer too.
I did, yep.
Cool. That's awesome. Well, let's jump into it, guys. Thank you all so much for joining us. We really want to lean in on conflict and feedback. And this is a weird topic. I think some people kind of tiptoe around the idea of conflict. Yeah. And we kind of want to help break down that wall and talk about why it's healthy, how you can do it healthily, and what are some things to look for. So let's start with why that we think that feedback is an important part of a healthy community in general, kind of like starting from the top up. Why is feedback and conflict like a good part of a healthy community?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that when I think of feedback, I immediately just think of a group of people who like care about each other and care about the mission that's in front of them. And so when you are giving feedback or receiving feedback, whatever it is, it's truly just like, wow, this person is like taking the time to know me and see me and care about me so much that they like care about my growth and they care about what we are stepping into together and the mission that we're on together. And they care so much that they actually want to share about ways that I can grow and lean more into the mission and the person that the Lord has called them to be. And giving feedback is truly like a gift. Like I was on a team with people and the lingo that we use was gifting feedback rather than giving to just like circle around the fact that it's a gift to be around a group of people that just care so much about each other and what we get to do together. So that's kind of what I think about.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm on the gift train. Feedback is definitely a gift. And when I think about, the purpose of community and us as believers coming alongside each other, we're all striving for the same thing, right? We hope and are working toward becoming more like Jesus. And if we don't have feedback and we have blind spots and we are, not doing what we really are called to do in the way that we're called to do it, and we're unaware of it, then, in community, if that's not being called out, it's a disservice. And so we have an opportunity to be in a community that really loves us and cares about us and gives us the gift of saying, like, hey, I want to call you up, not call you out, and give you this opportunity to really address what might be keeping you from what you desire and what I desire, which is the same thing. So it's definitely a gift. And even though oftentimes we don't see it that way, if we treat it that way, then our community will grow and be even more vibrant as well.
Yeah. It's like it's so funny. It's just a shift of perspective when we can change the way we view it.
Yeah.
I oftentimes, when having these conversations, just think about myself and put myself in the position. And then so many times when I'm thinking about giving someone feedback, I don't want to because I'm afraid I'm going to hurt them. And what I'm doing in that is a disservice to them because I'm honestly having selfish thoughts. It's like I care about my perspective or like my thought of like, I don't want to hurt them. But I'm not flipping that and thinking like, how am I helping their growth and their development? And how would I want someone to do that for me? So it truly is that like this idea of perspective.
Yeah. And I would also say, just to add to that, I would also say most of my friends know we're going to have difficult conversations and they know that that's the mark that we are in true friendship because look, we don't have a lot of time in these streets just to be wasting our words. Okay. So if I'm going to really sit down and have a careful, caring, loving, honest, truthful, graceful conversation with someone, it means like, hey, I'm invested. I'm here. I love you. I care about you. And I want you to know what I have to say, not just for me to like have words that are out there in the stratosphere, but so that we can get closer and we can go deeper.
Yeah. So true.
Yeah.
So true. When we think about how most people receive feedback, what are some of the immediate reactions that people have, whether they're ourselves or just thinking of people in general? And then like, why would we have some of those reactions?
Yeah, I think and you even, Titus, really hit the nail on the head with this, but I think some people are nervous about feedback, whether they're the ones giving feedback or receiving feedback. But some of us have feedback PTSD because not all of our feedback conversations have been rooted or anchored in love and grace and care, or maybe they were, but the delivery was imperfect. I mean, I don't know about y'all, but I'm imperfect. And so even in the ways that I've given feedback, there are times that I have not delivered things well, and that's had an impact on the other person. I've also had that happen to me. And so even my perspective of feedback sometimes can be a little more apprehensive or cautious or like, oh no, what did I do this time? But I think also, to Emily's point, if we really take feedback for what it is and what it's supposed to be, our perspective and our position can be, okay, great, this is an opportunity for me to grow. This is a growth opportunity. So we can move from fear or apprehension to genuine curiosity and an open heart.
Yeah, that's so good.
Yeah, I think similarly to what you said, Marla, my immediate reaction, if I'm honest, is just to like kind of put a guard like around my heart. Like a guard kind of just goes up initially. And I honestly do get a little bit nervous, whether I'm receiving or even sometimes when I'm giving feedback, if I know it might not be the easiest of conversations. And that's just kind of my initial reaction. And I think you asked like, hey, why do you think you might respond that way? I think it's because even like growing up, I feel like I didn't have a lot of like hard conversations and feedback wasn't something that I typically got in like an intentional way. And so in the past couple years, now that I'm in spaces where I'm like healthily receiving and giving feedback, it's almost like I have to shift my brain of like, hey, no, this isn't like an attack on my identity. This is like someone that cares about me, like we've already mentioned. And so definitely still have that initial like guard is going up. But as I continue to be on the other side of those conversations, I'm like realizing more and more how valuable it is and how like loving it is to be able to receive words like that.
Yeah. So. And I think you even hit on this a little, Emily, of like, the more you've seen it, the more you've grown in feedback and stuff. I think there is part of it that's like kind of just receiving it and going through the awkward dance of learning how to give and receive feedback in a loving and kind way. Which can be awkward. Like that's kind of why I use that word. It can be kind of hard to figure out, but I do think that it is important to embrace that and like kind of train yourself, I guess, a little bit better. Would y'all agree?
For sure, I agree. And the training aspect and going through these experiences to really get a more accurate view of what it is, I think is crucial. And when I was little, my parents had this series by Prudence that was literally called Let's Talk About It. So anytime I did something that I wasn't supposed to do, it wasn't just like that I went straight to punishment. I had to pick a book from the shelf that was related to whatever I did, read about it, and then we had a conversation. Not saying there wasn't consequences. There were consequences because there were, but I learned very early on that that was a gift again, and that was an opportunity for me to learn from what I did, and that we could have a conversation, and that was needed because I wasn't just walking around like, well, I don't know what to do because I just got in trouble and I'm not sure like what the issue was. So yeah,
that's awesome. Okay, so we've talked about some feedback. We talked about why it's important in community and kind of the initial reactions we can have. Let's shift a little bit into like what we do when conflict does arise. Like how would you address conflict? How would you advise our listeners to do it? How would you do it personally? What are ways we can navigate kind of these like honestly just hard conversations or difficult conversations to have?
Prayer. Yeah, I think when you're addressing conflict, and not even just what I think, what God says about how we should approach all things, whether they're really exciting things or things we're nervous about, but definitely conflict, is to pray first, because ultimately we should move ourselves out of the way and ensure that we're not speaking from a place of pride. I tell people all the time, like, you'll either get Marlisha or Marlinda. Okay, you don't want Marlisha. Marlinda, she has encountered the Lord. Okay, and while I don't have split personalities, that's just a little, a little funny. Yeah. Really, there are times that when we give feedback that we're just speaking out of our hopes and dreams and wishes or our own personal disappointments. We're not really coming from the perspective of how can I honor the Lord and what can we do to just make sure that we have an opportunity to really be a blessing to the person on the other end of this. Yeah. And I think that when we lead with prayer and say, I'm going to lace this in grace and mercy and truth and honesty, like deep honesty about my real feelings and emotions, and be vulnerable, not just say, well, you did this and you came for me and like you need to adjust your attitude. It's, hey, well, when you said this, I really, felt these things because of this in my past, and, wanted to see how we can navigate better in the future. Like, you're setting yourself and the other person up for success, but you can't get there if you don't have a posture of prayer first, and you're not like, God, I need you to help me move out of the way, and I want to honor you in this conversation. So I would just say you should be led in prayer, and Matthew 18 really gives us a roadmap into how we're supposed to navigate conflict with believers and with non-believers as well, and the standards that we should hold ourselves and the other people to.
That's great, Marla. I think that I want to zoom out just a little bit. Instead of like when conflict arises, it's just like when you're on like a team with people. Yeah. And I think that kind of starts when you initially get on that team. And so this past summer, I feel like I tried to do my best to like set the tone for, hey, I'm going to like really be intentional about knowing these people and creating that relational equity, so that when conflict does arise, because it will and it did, you're able to kind of have that as a foundation, and kind of being honest with your team of like, hey, we're on a team and we're working together, and we're doing good work, but that doesn't mean that conflict is something we're not going to face. We are, and I'm like pretty confident of that. And so I tried to kind of lead with that so that everyone would be on the same page of like, we're going to kind of step into this together. We're all on the same side, and we're just trying to like fight something together. Yeah. And so wanted to start with that of just like, hey, I'm going to get to know my people and make it known to them that this is just something that we're going to lean into together. And then when you do get there, I think it's just like exactly what you said, Marla, that what you said is so good, of just like, hey, if we truly believe that the Lord has like placed us here on this team together, like how do we steward that well? Yeah. Conflict, obviously, I think we can all sit here and say like in like conflict or hard conversations, we've learned a lot about the Lord and ourselves and the person that we're having the conversation with. And so I think if we just center ourselves around like, yeah, the Lord has like given me this opportunity to learn more about him and how he's created me, I think that's a good place to start. And just being honest about like how you feel and what your intentions are in the conversation. Like if my intention is to just be understood by the person, like it's not really going to end well. Like I want to seek to understand and seek to listen and make that space so we can kind of come to a place where we understand each other.
Yeah. I think both of you both hit on a lot of pre-work. Like it takes a lot of pre-work going into having that conversation, whether it be prayer or even setting the stage. I think both of those are crucial, but again, putting myself in the situation, oftentimes those are whenever I find conflict or feedback did not go well, whatever the situation may be, oftentimes if I'm being true and honest with myself and reflecting on it later, it's probably because of a lack of preparation, whether it's a prayer or the expectations weren't set up or anything like that. So yeah, I think that those are great examples and great things that that we should all as leaders like be striving to do better, is to prepare ourselves for the conversations that are coming. Is there any, you kind of already answered my next question, but I want to kind of tee it up anyway. Is there anything else to help us in preparing for delivering feedback or helping resolve conflict? Any, like whether it's emotional checking or talking with a mentor, anything like that that may be helpful?
Yeah, I think what comes to mind is just like being like really practical with it. Like, of course, we're like going to pray and we're going to bring this to the Lord and partner with him in this. But also I find what helps me is just like coming in with maybe some specific questions to ask. Hey, I noticed that this happened, or you may have said this thing, or I said this thing. Like, how did that make you feel? I noticed that tends to help me a lot, and just like coming with like specific talking points. I mean, I've had harder conversations where I've had like my notes app out on my phone, and it just helps me kind of stay on track. And it's because we're humans and we get off track and things like that. And so like, don't be afraid to like be practical and do things that maybe feel silly. I've noticed that when I have kind of like a couple notes on my phone, it's like something that the other person actually felt cared for by. And so just thinking of things like that, I'm trying to think of maybe some other things that would be helpful practically, but I mean, everyone works differently.
Too. Yeah. Like, I think that's important, like reminding like, hey, I am a human as well, and I don't claim to have it all down and figure out everything. So yeah, I think that's huge. Yeah, and giving yourself grace too, because like we've said already, conversations are not perfect, and maybe we get to the other side of the conversation, we're like, oh, that is not what I was expecting, and that's okay, because you can have another conversation and another one, and you can seek counsel, like you said, from a mentor, and having those places to process is great too. So, Emily, you hit the nail on the head. And I think even how you ended earlier is a good way to just prepare all hearts. And you talked about seeking understanding, not just to be understood, but like you're really seeking to understand the person on the other end. And one of my mentors, Angela Rubenacker, while I was at camp, she taught me the phrase, like, help me understand. If we're leading with that, then it's not impossible for the other person to get defensive, right? Because anything's possible, but it's less likely because they will truly feel your intent through leading with that. Now, if that's not the intent, you shouldn't say it. But yeah, I think that's really good. For most of the hard conversations that I've had, I do seek out mentors. I mean, I just know myself. And I know, like I said, Marleisha's in there. So I'm like, I want to make sure that I'm considering, you know, as many perspectives as possible, and that I'm going to enter into this conversation also with wisdom. We talked about, you know, a lot of different things, but wisdom is something that is gained from those who have more years than you know, seeking the Lord in Scripture and His Word, and just developing that over time. So I often say, like, hey, these are the facts, and I'm completely honest, and I say I'm about to go into this
really difficult conversation. I'm a bit nervous about it for these reasons. Do you have any recommendations or advice? And oftentimes they will say things I don't want to hear. And it's not a conversation where I'm just being told, oh, girl, do what you need to. Oh, yeah, you better, get them. No, it's, hey, have you checked your heart in this area? Because even the way that you just presented this to me, it seems like there's a little bit of like unforgiveness from something that y'all experienced in the past, or you're being a little harsh in this way. And I'll be like, but you don't understand. But at the end of the day, the wisdom that they transition into me has prepared me to go into that conversation better. And I'm grateful for it. And the other thing that you talked about, Emily, I think is like the best way to prepare. When we talk about relational equity and building that, if we wait until like the time where there's conflict, we've missed it.
Right.
If you wait to dig deep, then you've missed it if you're waiting for the conflict. So really just getting to know people, getting to know their hearts, trying to seek to understand them on your team or not on your team. Maybe it's a cross-functional opportunity prior to this happening, really sets a solid foundation and groundwork that you may not even know you're going to need in the future. But you can know character traits about the other person. Hey, I know this is your heart. I've seen you do this and that. However, like this is something that was said that really hurt me deeply. So they also feel known in the process. And I think that's really awesome.
Yeah. And that all kind of ties back into what we were talking about earlier about community and like the importance of feedback and community.
Yeah.
Like seeking understanding and setting the stage before we get in there. It's, hey, we're all in this together. And if you did something that might have wronged me or hurt me, I'm not going to take the assumption that you are wrong and I'm right. I'm going to come into this with you and say, hey, let's figure this out together. Help me understand where you're coming from. And I think for me, one of the hard parts in that is like also taking my own pride back and being like, no, I truly mean this. Like, I want to understand where you're coming from. I'm not just saying something to try and build a fake bridge here, but I really want to help build a real bridge, and let's talk about this. So man,
and you're giving them the opportunity to make it right. There have been countless times that people have unintentionally harmed me, and I've kept it inside, but I've held it against them. And I know that there have been times that I've also harmed others, and if I knew the depth to which I had harmed them and I didn't get the opportunity to make it right, like that would make me really sad. And I would just feel like that opportunity was stolen from me. And so we don't need to be walking around stealing opportunities for reconciliation. We have an opportunity to open that up and to make sure that we as believers can really take what could be a really big chasm or a gap and just close it so the enemy doesn't really have a playground. He doesn't have that area and that space to really sow division and lies and darkness. And as that chasm closes, again, both of the people involved or all of the people, if there's a group, we have an opportunity to look more like Jesus.
This conversation is awesome. I said this earlier, this is one of my favorite topics because I think it is just so important. It's so crucial to us building the best leaders that we possibly can. If our purpose as believers is to be the most like Christ, then the best versions of ourselves as leaders is going to be the most reflectant of him. And I think this is something that Christ exemplified so well in his life. Okay, I want to shift a little bit though, as we are thinking specifically for summer staff that will be working camp. Put yourself back in camp, whether that was a few years ago or just last summer. Think back to some times or opportunities you had, whether it was to deliver feedback or go into a conflicting conversation, or the other side where someone gave you stuff. Share some of those stories, or maybe it was like even the process of, I know some of this stuff we're talking about here, but putting yourself back in like the busyness and the stressfulness of camp. How does that kind of change anything, or does it? Maybe it shouldn't,
That's good. Yeah, I would love to share. This past summer, I guess just for a little bit of context, in my role, I got to, like Titus mentioned, give about 23 performance reviews, and that felt like a really daunting task, but will forever be thankful that I got to do that. And I'll say it was a little bit hard to prioritize. And now looking back, like I said, I'm just so thankful that I got to do it. And in the busyness, I feel like the most important things are the ones that go first. And that was one of those things that I really had to be intentional about putting my brain to and thinking through, and chatting with the people that were mentoring me about how I can like best serve my team in that way. And a way that I tried to do that in a way that You shouted out a mentor, so I'm going to shout out Kenny McBride if you know him. I got to work with him a lot this past summer, and he kind of helped me with some language to share before I gave some feedback. And so I want to share it here because I hope that it's helpful for people who will be working this summer, because the hope is that everyone working this summer will receive feedback and good feedback. And so I wanted to share just 3 things that I would share with my team before stepping into those conversations. And the first one is, what's on this paper does not define who you are, and it's not your identity. And so though these things are important and they're prayerful, and I've thought through them and got to know you to share these things, it's not your identity. Your identity is in Christ. Yeah. So that's the first thing. The second thing is a hope for this conversation is for us to understand each other better. And so I want to understand you more and your intentions, but I would hope that you could even understand me more just as a friend and a teammate. And then the third one, which we have said countless times in this conversation, but it's so important, is how can we come out of this conversation with a better idea of how we look more like Jesus? Mm-hmm. And so I think setting the stage with those things really helps us to zoom out and not feel like what's on this paper is going to kind of drag me down for the next couple of days or weeks or whatever it may be, however we receive it. But really to say yeah, this person cares about me, kind of we started this conversation. And so I hope that's helpful for people who will be receiving feedback, which is all of the summer staff, just as a way of saying, we care a lot. And it's not who you are, but it's hopefully helpful.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's super practical and very helpful for anyone who's in a similar seat as giving feedback in the summer. That's huge.
Absolutely. I love all of those, and I think they tie beautifully into what we've been talking about. I will go into a conversation that was had with me and feedback that I was given in the past. This was probably 2016. Yeah, 2016. And one of my supervisors had a conversation with me, and I was really struggling with some of the language that we used at camp. Learning camp lingo and language apart from the songs was really difficult for me at first, and camp culture of saying we instead of I was very difficult for me initially, because I was well, I didn't do that or I am not responsible. That's a decision that you made. But my supervisor at the time really explained to me, not just the mission, vision, values of camp and things of that nature, but who we are called to be as believers, and that we are a part of a collective body. And so when we decide that I'm just going to be an arm out here on my own, I'm limiting my effectiveness, and I am not fully living into this opportunity in terms of serving campers and families with the message of Jesus Christ in the ways that I'm called to. And of course she said more, but it changed my heart in terms of the way she brought out the why and how she connected it to, again, just our bigger purpose of serving the Lord and having a heart that's bent on him and his ways, not our ways. And so I took the I mentality, which it's different in the context of my family, right? I can say we when it comes to my family, and that's fine. But when you enter into the camp context with a group of people that you don't really know that well, I knew one person when I first started serving camp in 2013. And even in 2016, there were very few people that I felt were close friends, although I loved being around the people on my team. And so I think for me, just having that heart shift, it could not have come without feedback. So again, this gift was given to me, and was just really excited to go into the camp season with new perspective, having grown, and it changed everything for me. Because that's really one of the turning points of when I took ownership of camp and made it feel like home, and it made my coworkers and those on my team really feel like family.
Yeah. Again, it's that perspective, kind of just shifting that perspective a little. And, man, that's awesome. Okay, so as our staff are gearing up for the summer, they're getting ready, what are some things that they can do now to change their attitude, their perspective, their thoughts towards conflict at large? I think, even something that pops in my mind is just you're going to have to learn to embrace it, because it's inevitable. Again, we mentioned this earlier, it's going to happen. It's a part of community. But yeah, thoughts from y'all?
Yeah, I think, and this might be more of a talent services perspective, but formal feedback is a part of life. And as we navigate through life and you have jobs and obligations that, you commit to, feedback can be expected. What I would also say is that feedback in terms of the context of WinShape is just different. And the way that we've intentionally set feedback up from a foundation level to all of our ministries, which will include camps, is for it to be something that makes you better, for it to be something that refines you, and for it to be something that gives you the tools that you need to perform your role better, like do your job better, and equip you with what you need in order to be able to not just like survive or make it or do okay, not just to meet expectations barely, but to far exceed what's expected of you and to go above and beyond. Scripture talks about going the second mile, but if you don't have the perspective to even go the first, you ain't gonna make it to the second. Like, that's a prerequisite. So I think that a part of this process really mimics the larger culture and society, and that we are going to have like more formal, expectations, because it is a job, it's a role. But within the context of WinShape, this is to set you up for success, both personally and professionally. So I would say seek out more opportunities, like seek them out. And that may be crazy because you're like, why would I seek out something I don't love or I don't like or that I haven't done very often? But if you're not living in community and you don't have systems of accountability or groups where you're giving feedback, receiving feedback, if you don't have a mentor, if you're not mentoring, putting yourself in those positions will help to prepare you and gear you up for what will be expected of you in terms of receiving and giving.
Yeah, it's that awkward dance.
Oh, yeah.
That's right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's good. And so with the understanding of what Marla just said and the understanding that like we're like gifting feedback, I would just encourage everyone that's listening in this springtime to like be really honest with yourself of, hey, I would really love to be intentional to grow in this, and this summer. Like, hey, I've noticed that I have a tendency to blank. Like, I would love to be intentional about growing in that this summer. And WinShape is truly a great place this summer. It's a great place to be intentional about that because you'll be around people that are like so eager and ready to invest in you. And so obviously that isn't only contained in the summer. Like if there's people in your life, mentors and things now, like share that with them and start processing those things because like I said, it'll just be a really intentional space in the summer. Like Marla said, the heart is just to help you grow as a person. And so if you take this time now while you're away to just think of how you feel like the Lord is calling you to step up higher and be more like him, I think that you'll be set up really well to be in a space where feedback is really common and happens a lot. So
again, back to the pre-work.
Yep.
Doing the pre-work and setting ourselves up. Yeah. This has been an awesome conversation. Thank you all both so much. We've hit on the importance of feedback in our community. We've talked about like the initial reactions we can have to conflict and how that can be hard and why we might feel those ways. We talked about how to address. We did the pre-work. We talked about what to do beforehand. And we talked specifically about the summer and like what to expect when we get there. As we are wrapping up, I wanted to ask both of y'all, do you have any more final thoughts or anything that you would like to leave our staff with as they're kind of listening to this and prepping their hearts for the summer?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to just end us on like, if you step into this summer with the intention to be a really awesome worship speaker, or I want to be the best team time leader I can be, or I want to be the best blank, fill in the blank of whatever your role is, and you focus purely on that, or even on the end of conflict. Hey, I'm just going to like try to get through this summer without any conflict, or just like kind of seek conflict out just to get to the end of the summer and just be done working on this team. Like you're really doing like a disservice to yourself because like Marla said, WinShape is really dedicated to you growing as a person. And so really, I just encourage you to view feedback as a way to grow in the Lord and who he's created you to be. And yes, like the performance aspect is important and we like strive to go that second mile and do excellent work and serve campers and families and communities across the nation. But at the end of the day, like we can only do that if we are striving to be more like Christ, and feedback is just like a really practical tool that the Lord has given us, and to do that and to look more like him. So I just encourage you to kind of like zoom out and really find specific ways that the Lord is like calling you to grow as a person.
Yeah, I love that. I would say the prayer would be, and I know the hustle and the bustle of the camp season and how everything just seems so big in the moment and so personal. And I would go back to what Emily said earlier, is that, feedback is not an attack on your identity. Mm-hmm. And we are not perfect feedback givers. Although we have intentionally set this up to grow you and to invest in you and to give you an opportunity, we are not perfect. And we are still growing, as all organizations and all people are, in our cultural understandings and nuances and the right verbiage and words and processes and procedures. So we are not going to give a perfect product. However, I think if we are really coming in with the heart set and the posture of like, I know this is set up for my good, and I know this is set up to make me successful and to grow me in more ways than I could ever imagine, we're at least starting from a place that can allow a seed to really sprout in terms of whatever God wants to plant in our hearts through this process. And I think also the other side of that is, like, don't be afraid to let us know where and how we've missed the mark respectfully. To let us know. That's also a part of feedback in all of our performance review processes. In all of our conversations and all of our community conversations, there should be curated space for those receiving feedback to also give it. And so give it and be honest. Don't hide away the things that you've experienced that don't align with what we've talked about today. Give us the opportunity to make it right, to love and care for you well, and to help reconcile where we can, so that we can truly be the body of believers in the way that God has called us to.
Yeah, we always talk about how much we love evaluation and eval. And I think if we're going to say that, even when it's hard, we have to be able to accept that.
Absolutely.
And do it right. I guess in an attempt to oversimplify it, we're just trying to be more like Christ. And whatever we can do individually and organizationally to be more like Christ, we are accepting that challenge to step into conflict and feedback and do it better. So thank you all so much. This is an awesome conversation. Marla, Emily, really appreciate y'all joining and giving us a little bit of your time. And I'm excited to see kind of what comes out of this for our listeners and for our staff as they gear up for the summer. So thank you guys so much for listening to this week's episode of Leaders in the Making. Now, I've got a quick challenge for you all. We are still looking for top-notch summer staff. So here's a challenge. Think about your friends, your siblings, and your classmates. Maybe it's you. If you happened upon this podcast and you aren't working this summer, I want to challenge you to look at yourself and ask if you want to spend your summer impacting the lives of campers. If that's the case, whether it's yourself or a friend you may know, head on over to workatwinshape.org and encourage them to apply today. We're going to try and make this summer the most unforgettable summer we can for you, your friends, and all the campers around the world that we're going to be impacting this summer, and we want to invite you on for that. So thanks for being a part of the WinShape mission, and thank you so much for listening. Until next time, I'm your host, Titus Arnold. We'll see you later.